Well, which idea should I do next? I'm thinking either beauty or liberty or in love should be a good one, but we can save that for further on down the road. Update on the books that I ordered. I'm not going to get it. Yeah, they told me that it was returned to them damaged by the shipping company, which might be true. They probably like did a poor job packing it or something. That, or they just realized, oh crap, it's going to cost us more than the price of than he paid just to ship it. So it's fine. I don't care. As long as they refund me. Almost got a good deal. All right. I think we'll do beauty. I think I would like to read. Of all the great books, I feel like complete works of Shakespeare would be the coolest to know super well. The thing is, though, you can't. I feel like it would be a little annoying to read aloud because I'm only one person, and Shakespeare's meant to be performed by multiple people. It's mostly just people talking to each other. So it would be me constantly saying like the person's name first. Mira. And it's, you know, long names a lot of times. Miranda. Prospero. But then also, like, I can't perform freaking women's voices and stuff. Different. I'm not a voice actor. But I would like, maybe I just read it anyway and say screw the audience. They don't know who's talking. But I could do something interesting, like put up like a display of different like people, and then every time said person is speaking, I switch to that overlay, kind of like a movie. But then I'd probably want to make like different scenes and stuff. Just do an entire Shakespeare play on my computer with like different assets for the actors. That'd just be me talking the entire time. I could do like a voice changer too every time. That'd be kind of funny. Like automatically change my voice too whenever I switch to a different character. That's the type of shit that goes viral because it's unintentionally hilarious. But I would just like to read all this stuff. Be familiar with it. Because I like Shakespeare. It's the most I don't know. It is deliciously dramatic and complex. The Tempest, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Merry Wives of Windsor, Twelfth Night, or What You Will, Measure for Measure, Much Ado About Nothing, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Love's Labor's Lost, The Merchant of Venice, As You Like It, All's Well That Ends Well, The Taming of the Shrew, The Winter's Tale, Comedy of Errors, King John, The Life and Death of King Richard II, King Richard IV, First Part, King Henry IV, First Part, King Henry IV, Second Part, King Henry V, King Henry VI, First Part, King Henry VI, Second Part, King Henry VI, Third Part, The Life and Death of King Richard III, King Henry VIII. Troilus and Cressida, Timon of Athens, Coriolanus, Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra, Cymbeline, Titus Andronicus, Pericles, Prince of Tyre, King Lear, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, Othello, the Moor of Venice. I might actually put some thought into that. Do like live one-man Shakespeare performances with a voice changer and like digital assets on a stream. Oh, that would be cringe, you say. Well, maybe. But people like cringe stuff. I like to laugh at it. Which is fine with me. Especially if they're also being enriched with Shakespeare at the same time. Although, I think really the only thing you can do with a voice modifier is make the voice in deeper or higher. I don't really know how advanced that software is getting. Complete works of Shakespeare. But for now, uh-oh, out of focus. Oh. Focus. What's the deal? What's the matter? Focus. Focus, damn you. There's a big white line down the side, isn't there? If I deactivate and then activate. Yeah, that helped. All right. Just a lot of work today. But only for like 3 hours. But I gotta figure out how to make more money. Or drastically reduce my expenses. One of the two. Whatever results in me having more free time. Without being homeless. Beauty. 112. Beauty. This is a very significant topic. Dang, it's really only 4 pages. 6.5-ish. That's good. I have other stuff to do today. Chapter 6, Beauty. Introduction. Better posture. Truth, goodness, and beauty form a triad of terms which have been discussed together throughout the tradition of Western thought. They have been called transcendental on the ground that everything which is in some measure or manner subject to denomination as true or false, good or evil, beautiful or ugly. But they have also been assigned to special spheres of being or subject matter. The true to thought and logic, the good to action and morals, the beautiful to enjoyment and aesthetics. They've been called the three fundamental values, with the implication that the worth of anything can be exhaustively judged by reference to these three standards and no others. But other terms, such as pleasure or utility, have been proposed, either as additional values or as significant variants of the so-called fundamental three, or even sometimes as more fundamental. Pleasure or utility, for example, have been held by men like Spinoza or Mill to be the ultimate criterion of beauty or goodness. Truth, goodness, and beauty singly and together have been the focus of the age-old controversy concerning the absolute and relative, the objective and the subjective, the universal and the individual. At certain times, it has been thought that the distinction of true from false, good from evil, beautiful from ugly, has its basis and warranty in the very nature of things, and that a man's judgment of these matters is measured for its soundness or accuracy by its conformity to fact. At other times, the opposite position has been dominant. One meaning of the ancient saying that man is the measure of all things applies particularly to the true, good, and beautiful. Man measures truth, goodness, and beauty by the effect things have upon him, according to what they seem to him to be. What seems good to one man may seem evil to another. What seems ugly or false may also seem beautiful or true to different men, or to the same man at different times. Yet it is not altogether true that these three terms have always suffered the same fortunes. For Spinoza, goodness and beauty are subjective, but not truth, because he, quote, has persuaded himself that all things which exist are made for him. Man, Spinoza says, judges that to be, quote, of the greatest importance, which is most useful to him, and he must esteem that to be of surpassing worth, by which he is most beneficially affected. The notions of good and evil, beauty and ugliness, do not conform to anything in the nature of things. The ignorant, says Spinoza, nevertheless, quote, call the nature of a thing good, evil, sound, putrid, or corrupt, just as they are affected by it. For example, if the motion by which the nerves are affected by means of objects represented to the eye conduces to well-being, the objects by which it is caused are called beautiful, while those exciting a contrary motion are called deformed. Beauty has been frequently regarded as subjective or relative to the individual judgment. The familiar maxim, de gustibus non disputandum, has its original application in the sphere of beauty rather than truth and goodness. Truth is disputable, Hume writes, not taste. No man reasons concerning another's beauty, but frequently concerning the justice or injustice of his actions. Thus, even when it was supposed that judgments of the true and good could have a certain absoluteness or universality, or at least be considered as something about which men might reach agreement through argument. Opinions about beauty were set apart as useless to dispute, beauty being simply a matter of individual taste. It could afford no basis for argument or reasoning, no objective ground for settling differences of opinion. From the ancient skeptics down to our own day, men have noted the great variety of traits, often sharply opposed, which have been considered beautiful at different times and places. We fancy its forms, Montaigne says of beauty, according to our appetite and liking. Indians paint it black and tawny, with great swollen lips, big flat noses, and load the cartilage betwixt the nostrils with great rings of gold, to make it hang down to the mouth. In Peru, the greatest ears are the most beautiful, and they stretch them out as far as they can by art. There are elsewhere nations that take great care to blacken their teeth and hate to see them white. Elsewhere, people that paint them red. The Italians fashion beauty gross and massive. The Spaniards gaunt and slender. Among us, one makes it white, another brown. One soft and delicate, another strong and vigorous. Just as the preference in beauty is given by Plato to the spherical figure, the Epicureans give it to the pyramidal or the square, and cannot swallow a god in the form of a ball. Like Montaigne, Darwin gives an extensive account of the things men have found beautiful, many of them so various and contradictory that it would seem there could be no objective basis for judgments of beauty. If any consensus is found among individuals about what is beautiful or ugly, the skeptics or relativists usually explain it by reference to the prevalence of certain prejudices or customary standards, which in turn vary with different tribes and cultures and at different times and places. Beginning in the sphere of beauty, subjectivism or relativism spreads first to judgments of good and evil, and then to statements about truth, never in the opposite direction. It becomes complete when, as so frequently happens in our time, what is good or true is hailed to be just as much a matter of private taste or customary opinion as what is beautiful. The problem of the objectivity or subjectivity of beauty can, of course, be separated from similar problems with regard to truth and goodness, but any attempt to solve it will necessarily both draw on and bear on the discussion of these related problems. The degree to which the three problems must be considered independently is determined by the extent to which each of the three terms requires the context of the other two for its definition and analysis. Beauty is perhaps not definable in any strict sense of definition, but there have been, nevertheless, many attempts to state with the brevity of definition what beauty is. Usually notions of goodness or correlative notions of desire and love enter into this statement. Aquinas, for example, declares that, quote, "The beautiful is the same as the good, and they differ in aspect only. The notion of good is that which calms the desire. while the notion of the beautiful is that which calms the desire by being seen or known. This, according to Aquinas, implies that, quote, beauty adds to goodness, a relation to the cognitive faculty, so that good means that which simply pleases the appetite, while the beautiful is something pleasant to apprehend. Because of its relation to the cognitive power, Aquinas defines the beautiful as, quote, that which pleases upon being seen. Id quod visum placet. Hence he continues, beauty consists in due proportion, for the senses delight in things duly proportioned. Because the sense, too, is a sort of reason, as is every cognitive power. The pleasure or delight involved in the perception of beauty belongs to the order of knowing rather than to desire or action. The knowing, furthermore, seems to be different from that which is proper to science, for it is concerned with the individual thing rather than with universal natures, and it occurs intuitively or contemplatively rather than by judgment and reasoning. There is a mode of truth peculiar to the beautiful, as well as a special kind of goodness. Fully to understand what Aquinas is saying about beauty, we are required to understand his theory of goodness and truth. But enough is immediately clear to give meaning to Eric Gill's advice to those who are concerned with making things beautiful. Look after goodness and truth, he says, and beauty will take care of herself. To define beauty in terms of pleasure would seem to make it relative to the individual. For what gives pleasure, even contemplative pleasure, to one man may not to another. It should be noted, however, that the pleasure in question is attributed to the object of its cause. It may be asked, therefore, what in the object is the cause of the peculiar satisfaction which constitutes the experience of beauty? Can the same object just as readily arouse displeasure in another individual and a consequent judgment of ugliness? Are these opposite reactions entirely the result of the way an individual feels? Aquinas appears to meet this difficulty by specifying certain objective elements of beauty, or conditions, as he calls them. Beauty includes three conditions, he writes: integrity or perfection, since those things which are impaired are by that very fact ugly; due proportion or harmony; and lastly, brightness or clarity, whence things are called beautiful, which have a bright color. Quite apart from individual reactions, objects may differ in the degree to which they possess such properties, traits which are capable of pleasing or displeasing their beholder. This does not mean that the individual reaction is invariably in accordance with the objective characteristics of the thing beheld. Men differ in the degree to which they possess good perception and sound critical judgment, even as objects differ in the degree to which they possess the elements of beauty. Period. Once again, in the controversy concerning the objectivity or subjectivity of beauty, there seems to be a middle ground between the two extreme positions, which insists upon a beauty intrinsic to the object, but does not deny the relevance of differences in individual sensibility. William James would seem to be indicating such a position when, In his discussion of aesthetic principles, he declares, "We are once and for all so made that when certain impressions come before our mind, one of them will seem to call for a repel, the others as its companions." As an example, he cites the fact that a note sounds good with its third and fifth. Such an aesthetic judgment certainly depends upon individual sensibility, and James adds, to a certain extent, the principle of habit will explain it. But he also points out that to explain all aesthetic judgments in this way would be absurd, for it is notorious how seldom natural experiences come up to our aesthetic demands. To the extent that aesthetic judgments express inner harmonies and discords between objects of thought, the beautiful, according to James, has a certain objectivity, and good taste can be conceived as the capacity to be pleased by objects which should elicit that reaction. Kant's theory of the beautiful, to take another conception, must also be understood in the general context of his theory of knowledge and his analysis of such terms as good, pleasure, and desire. His definition, like that of Aquinas, calls an object beautiful if it satisfies the observer in a very special way, not merely pleasing his senses or satisfying his desires in the ways in which things good as means or ends fit a man's interests or purposes. The beautiful, according to Kant, pleases immediately, apart from all interest. The pleasure that results from its contemplation, may be said to be the one and only disinterested and free delight, for with it no interest, whether of sense or reason, extorts approval. The aesthetic experience is, for Kant, also unique in that its judgment is represented as universal, i.e., valid for every man. Yet, at the same time, it is incognizable by means of any universal concept. In other words, all judgments of taste are singular judgments. They are without concept in the sense that they do not apply to a class of objects. Nevertheless, they have a certain universality and are not merely the formulation of a private judgment. When we call the object beautiful, Kant says, we believe ourselves to be speaking with a universal voice and lay claim to the concurrence of everyone, whereas no private sensation would be decisive except for the observer alone and his liking. In saying that aesthetic judgments have subjective, not objective, universality, and in holding that the beautiful is the object of necessary satisfaction, Kant also seems to take a middle position which recognizes the subjectivity of the aesthetic judgment without denying that beauty is somehow an intrinsic property of objects. With regard to its subjective character, Kant cites Hume in the effect that although critics are able to reason more plausibly than cooks, they must still share the same fate. The universal character of the aesthetic judgment, however, keeps it from being completely subjective, and Kant goes to some length to refute the notion that in matters of the beautiful, one can seek refuge in the adage that everyone has his own taste. The fact that the aesthetic judgment requires universal assent, even though the universal rule on which it is based cannot be formulated, does not, of course, preclude the failure of the object to win such assent from many individuals. Not all men have good taste, or, having it, have it to the same degree. The foregoing considerations, selective rather than exhaustive, show the connection between definitions of beauty and the problem of aesthetic training. In the traditional discussion of the ends of education, there is the problem of how to cultivate good taste, the ability to discriminate critically between the beautiful and the ugly. If beauty is entirely subjective, entirely a matter of individual feeling, then, except for conformity to standards set by the customs of the time and place, no criteria would seem to be available for measuring the taste of individuals. If beauty is simply objective, something immediately apparent to observation, as are the simple sensible qualities, no special training would seem to be needed for sharpening our perception of it. The genuineness of the educational problem in the sphere of beauty seems, therefore, to depend upon a theory of the beautiful which avoids both extremes, and which permits the educator to aim at a development of individual sensibilities in accordance with the objective criteria of taste. The foregoing considerations also provide background for the problem of beauty in nature and in art. As indicated in the chapter on art, the consideration of art in recent times tends to become restricted to the theory of the fine arts. So, too, the consideration of beauty has become more and more an analysis of excellence in poetry, music, painting, and sculpture. In consequence, the meaning of the word aesthetic has progressively narrowed, until now it refers almost exclusively to the appreciation of works of fine art, where before it connoted any experience of the beautiful in the things of nature as well as in the works of man. The question is raised, then, whether natural beauty or the perception of beauty in nature involves the same elements and causes as beauty in art. Is the beauty of a flower or of a flowering field determined by the same factors as the beauty of a still life or a landscape painting? The affirmative answer seems to be assumed in a large part of the tradition. In his discussion of the beautiful in the Poetics, Aristotle explicitly applies the same standard to both nature and art. To be beautiful, he writes, a living creature and every whole made up of parts must not only present a certain order in its arrangement of parts, but also be of a certain magnitude. Aristotle's notion that art imitates nature indicates a further relation between the beautiful in art and nature. Unity, proportion, and clarity would then be elements common to beauty in its every occurrence, though these elements may be embodied differently in things which have a difference in their mode of being, as do natural and artificial things. With regard to the beauty of nature and of art, Kant tends to take the opposite position. He points out that the mind cannot reflect on the beauty of nature without at the same time finding its interest engaged. Apart from any question of use that might be involved, he concludes that interest aroused by the beautiful in nature is akin to the moral, particularly from the fact that, quote, nature, in her beautiful products displays herself as art, not as a mere matter of chance, but as it were, designedly according to a law of direct arrangement. According to a law directed arrangement. The fact that natural things and works of art stand in a different relation to purpose or interest is for Kant an immediate indication that their beauty is different. Their susceptibility for Kant, as for his predecessors, their susceptibility to disinterested enjoyment is not the same. Yet, for Kant, as for his predecessors, nature provides the model or archetype which art follows, and even speaks of art as an imitation of nature. The Kantian discussion of nature and art moves into another dimension when it considers the distinction between the beautiful and the sublime. We must look for the sublime, Kant says, not in works of art, nor yet in things of nature, that in their very concept import a definite end, e.g., animals of a recognized natural order, but in rude nature merely as involving magnitude. In company with Longinus and Edmund Burke, Kant characterizes the sublime by reference to the limitations of human powers. Whereas the beautiful consists in limitation, the sublime immediately involves, or else by its presence provokes, a representation of limitlessness, which, quote, may appear indeed in point or form to contravene the ends of our power of judgment, to be ill adapted to our faculty of presentation, and to be, as it were, an outrage on the imagination. Made aware of his own weakness, man is dwarfed by nature's magnificence, but at the very moment he is also elevated by realizing his ability to appreciate that which is so much greater than himself. This dual mood signalizes man's experience of the sublime. Unlike the enjoyment of beauty, it is neither disinterested nor devoid of moral tone. Truth is usually connected with perception and thought, the good with desire and action. Both have been related to love and, in different ways, to pleasure and pain. All these terms naturally occur in the traditional discussion of beauty, partly by way of definition, but also partly in the course of considering the faculties engaged in the experience of beauty. Basic here is the question whether beauty is an object of love or desire. The meaning of any answer will, of course, vary with different conceptions of desire and love. Desire is sometimes thought of as a fundamentally acquisitive, directed toward the appropriation of a good, whereas love, on the contrary, aims at no personal aggrandizement, but rather, with complete generosity, wishes only the well-being of the beloved. In this context, beauty seems to be more closely associated with a good that is loved than with a good desired. Love, moreover, is more akin to knowledge than is desire. The act of contemplation is sometimes understood as a union with the object through both knowledge and love. Here again, The context of meaning favors the alignment of beauty with love, at least for theories which make beauty primarily an object of contemplation. In Plato and Plotinus, and on another level in the theologians, the two considerations of love and beauty fuse together inseparably. It is the privilege of beauty, Plato thinks, to offer man the readiest access to the world of ideas. According to the myth in the Phaedrus, the contemplation of beauty enables the soul to grow wings. This experience, ultimately intellectual in its aims, is described by Plato as identical with love. The observer of beauty, quote, is amazed when he sees anyone having a godlike face or form, which is the expression of divine beauty, and at first a shudder runs through him, and against the old awe steals over him. Then, looking upon the face of his beloved as of a god, he reverences him, and if he were not afraid of being thought a downright madman, he would sacrifice to his beloved as to the image of a god. When the soul bathes herself, quote, in the waters of beauty, her constraint is loosened and she is refreshed, and has no more pangs and pains. This state of the soul, enraptured by beauty, Plato goes on to say, is by men called love. Sharply opposed to Plato's intellectualization of beauty is that conception which connects it with sensual pleasure and sexual attraction. When Darwin, for instance, considers the sense of beauty, he confines his attention almost entirely to the colors and sounds used as, quote, attractions of the opposite sex. Freud, likewise, while admitting that psychoanalysis has less to say about beauty than about most things, claims that, quote, its derivation from the realm of sexual sensation seems certain. Blah, blah. Yeah, Freud and Darwin, there's nothing magical about anything. Such considerations may not remove beauty from the sphere of love. But as the chapter on love makes clear, love has many meanings, and it is of many sorts. The beautiful, which is sexually attractive, is the object of a love which is almost identical with desire, sometimes with lust, and certainly involves animal impulses and bodily pleasures. The taste for the beautiful, writes Darwin, at least as far as female beauty is concerned, is not of a special nature in the human mind. On the other hand, Darwin attributes to man alone an aesthetic faculty for the appreciation of beauty apart from love or sex. No other animal, he thinks, is, quote, capable of admiring such senses as the heavens at night, a beautiful landscape, or refined music. But such high tastes are required through culture and depend on complex associations. They are not enjoyed by barbarians or by uneducated persons. Again, bullshit. For Freud, however, the appreciation of such beauties remains ultimately sexual in motivation, no matter how sublimated in effect. The love of beauty, he says, is the perfect example of a feeling with an inhibited aim. Beauty and attraction are, first of all, the attributes of sexual objects. Sexual object. The theme of beauty's relation to desire and love is connected with another basic theme, the relation of beauty to sense and intellect, or to the realms of perception and thought. The two discussions naturally run parallel. The main question here concerns the existence of beauty in the order of purely intelligible objects and its relation to the sensible beauty of material things. Plotinus, holding that beauty of every kind comes from a form or reason, traces the, quote, beauty which is in bodies, as well as that, quote, which is in the soul, to its source in the eternal intelligence. This intelligible beauty lies outside the range of desire, even as it is beyond the reach of sense perception. Only the admiration of the adoration of love is proper to it. These distinctions in types of beauty, natural and artificial, sensible and intelligible, even perhaps material and spiritual, indicate the scope of the discussion, though not all writers on beauty deal with all its manifestations. Primarily concerned with other subjects, many of the great books make only an indirect contribution to the theory of beauty. The moral treatises, which consider the spiritual beauty of a noble man or of a virtuous character, the cosmologies of the philosophers or scientists, which find beauty in the structure of the world, the intelligible, not sensible order of the universe. The mathematical works which exhibit and sometimes enunciate an awareness of formal beauty in the necessary connection of ideas. The great poems which crystallize beauty in a scene, in a face, in a deed. And above all, the writings of the theologians, which do not try to do more than suggest the ineffable splendor of God's infinite beauty, a beauty infused with truth and goodness, all absolute in the one absolute perfection of the divine being. Quote, the divine goodness, observes Dante, which from itself spurns all envy, burning in itself, so sparkles that it displays the eternal beauties. Some of the great books consider the various kinds of beauty, not so much with a view to clarifying their variety, as in order to set forth the concordance of the grades of beauty with the grades of being, and with the levels of love and knowledge. The ladder of love in Plato's Symposium describes an ascent from lower to higher forms of beauty. He who has been instructed thus far in the things of love, Diotima tells Socrates, and who has learned to see beauty in due order and succession, when he comes toward the end, will suddenly perceive a nature of wondrous beauty, beauty absolute, separate, simple, and everlasting, which without diminution and without increase or any change is imparted to the ever-growing and perishing beauties of all other things. He who from these, ascending under the influence of true love, begins to perceive that beauty, is not far from the end. The order of ascent, according to Diotima, begins, quote, with the beauties of earth and mounts upward, for the sake of that other beauty, going from one fair form to, quote, all the fair forms, and from fair forms to fair practices, and from fair practices to fair notions, until from fair notions we come to the notion of absolute beauty, and at last know what the essence of beauty is. This, my dear Socrates, she concludes, is the life above all others which man should live in the contemplation of beauty absolute. For Plotinus, the degrees of beauty correspond to degrees of emancipation from matter. Quote, the more it goes towards matter, the feebler beauty becomes. A thing is ugly only because, quote, not dominated by form and reason, the matter has not been completely informed by the idea. If a thing could be completely, quote, without reason and form, it would be absolute ugliness. But whatever exists possesses form and reason to some extent, and has some share of the effulgent beauty of the one, even as it has some share through emanation in its overflowing being. The grades of beauty, as of being, signify the remotion of each thing from its ultimate source. Even separated from a continuous scale of beauty, the extreme terms, the beauty of God and the beauty of the least of finite things, have similitude for a theologian like Aquinas. The word visum, in his definition of the beautiful, id quod visum placet, that which pleases upon being seen, is the word used to signify the type of supernatural knowledge promised to the souls of the blessed, the beatific vision, in which God is beheld intuitively, not known discursively, and in which knowledge united with love is the principle of the soul's union with God. An analogy is obviously implied. In this life and on the natural level, every experience of beauty, in nature or art, in sensible things or in ideas, occasions something like an act of vision, a moment of contemplation, of enjoyment detached from desire or action, and clear without the articulations of analysis or the demonstrations of reason. Yeah, the definition makes sense to me. Pleases upon being seen, not necessarily seen with the eyes. And you don't really need to get anything else from it, just to see it. But it might do more than please. You might say that for it to be beauty, it should do more than just please you. The general theory of beauty, beautiful and the good, beauty and truth, beautiful as an object of contemplation, the elements of beauty, unity, proportion, clarity, beauty in relation to desire and love as object or cause. I really do hope that this set sold well during its being printed. I guess it did, because I asked ChatGPT about this. It said it didn't have the exact numbers, but judging by the times it was reprinted, which is, I think just once, it sold well. think it was reprinted in the 90s, the early 90s. It did another printing run. BAUT. Apply formatting. Yeah, I don't know if... Maybe I'll try to do the... I'll look into doing the Shakespeare production stream craziness. I would have to, like, keybind some voice modifiers and scene switching logic. And then when I'm reading, I would quickly switch between characters as I read their parts. And it would also modify my voice for, like, the female characters. That could work. I mean, I just really want to be able to understand the story when listening to it. Oh, man. Freaking insane. Well, I wonder if I could... That's getting pretty out there, but if I could, you know how people have filters like on TikTok and stuff that make them look like different people? Instead of just showing a picture of somebody, I could put a filter on myself with the green screen. And do entire Shakespeare plays just by myself with filters and voice modifiers. I like it. I like that idea. We'll look into that. Be a fun hobby anyway. Okay, so I have to cross off beauty, which is my view list 1. Scroll down. Bing. Okay. I'm gonna go for a motorcycle ride. I gotta figure out why that bike is so loud. Apparently KLRs are just loud. They call them cement mixers. That's what they sound like. I never thought it was that bad until, like, recently. Really, the only thing I can think of at this point is different head pipe. But I think most of the noise is coming from, like, the engine itself. Which seems great. It's like the muffler's not really doing anything. Maybe the valves aren't sealing correctly when the combustion happens. Which would be the case if my cam lobes were a little bit off the timing chain. I think they're perfect. I couldn't get it more perfect. There's a way I can test that more precisely. Maybe I'll take my motorcycle to a parking lot somewhere and take the gas tank off, rig up some way to feed it fuel with the gas tank removed, which will allow me to inspect it more closely when it's running and maybe be able to tell where the noise is coming from. Because it seems to get quieter at higher RPMs. But when it's idling, it's like there's like a loud, like annoying sound. Maybe the head pipe would fix it. I mean, it's nice to think that for some reason the head pipe is making it loud, but I don't think it will be that easy. I can't believe how much my personal expenses stress me out. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. It's like barely, I don't have like any debt payments. Well, I do now, since I put that freaking cylinder head on the credit card. But just the most basic existence. No family, no nothing. I don't even have a pet. And they're like, well, how come people aren't having kids anymore? Because everything's too expensive to begin with. Everybody's overworked. I'm sick of this society. Maybe things will change. But probably not. It's me that needs to change. Change up here. Right? That's what these books are for. Nobody can make you be fucking stressed and miserable all the time. If you don't let them. If your mind is focused on other things, good things, productive things. That's the strange thing about it. They put you in debt. And then it's like they don't want you to pay it back. They just want you to suffer. All right, that's it.